Good morning, Year One. Happy Thursday. Today, for shared reading, we are going to be reading the story again, How the Kangaroo Got Their Tails. We're going to be looking at some grammar features and punctuation throughout the story. But your learning task for today is to answer the question, How the Kangaroos Got Their Tail. So you're going to have to think what event happened for them to get their tails. So that's what you're going to be answering at the end of today's shared reading lesson. Let's begin reading.
How the Kangaroos Got Their Tails, an Aboriginal story told by George Mungmung Lirmiyari, compiled by Pamela Lofts. I'm going to tell you a story about how the kangaroos got their tails. In the early days, in the dream time, there were two kangaroos who lived in this country. One came from the hills, the other from the plains. The plains kangaroo was a big kangaroo with long arms and long legs. The hill kangaroo was a small kangaroo with short arms and short legs. One day, the short-armed kangaroo was walking around hunting for sugarbag, wild bush honey. You can find sugarbag by watching the bees and following them to their hive where they make the honey.
So if we have a look at this image, we can see the kangaroo doesn't quite have a tail yet, which is really interesting because if I see an Australian kangaroo, sometimes I see some hopping outside in my nature reserve out the back, they all have tails. So it's very interesting that the Indigenous Australian Dreamtime story started with the kangaroo started without a tail, and they believe that something happened for them to get a tail. Now, I know we have read this story, but that's what I really want you to focus on today, looking at what event caused the kangaroo to get their tails. Let's continue reading.
He really liked Sugarbag, that short-armed kangaroo, so he kept on looking and looking until he found some in a hole in a rock. He reached just inside that hole and pulled out a handful of Sugarbag and ate it. It was good tucker. Now, that big kangaroo was hungry for Sugarbag himself. He sat down next to the short-armed kangaroo. "Hey, what are you eating?" he said. "I'm eating Sugarbag," said the short-armed kangaroo. "You've got long arms. You can reach right down and get some too."
Okay, if we have a look at the punctuation on this story, I can see that they have started with a capital letter. Excellent. We always start with a capital letter in our writing. Now, that big kangaroo was hungry for Sugarbag himself. And I can see a little something called an exclamation mark at the end of this sentence. I'm wondering if you're thinking, what does an exclamation mark do? When we were listening to that story, the reader had some expression in her voice. She read the sentence, "Now that big kangaroo was hungry for Sugarbag himself." Her voice changed. So we need to have expression in our voice when we read when there's an exclamation mark. If we go over to the next page, we can see He sat down next to the short-armed kangaroo. Full stop. Excellent. We have a capital letter and a full stop for our simple sentence. Oh, I wonder what this symbol means in punctuation. You can see two little dashes. They are quotation marks, and that is telling us that somebody is speaking in the story. And we can see that there was a question mark just before the quotation mark. So, hey, what are you eating? He's asking a question. We can see again more quotation marks, which means another character is speaking in the story. So that means we need to change our voice when we see those quotation marks, because we need to change our voice for the other person who's speaking, because we know all characters have different tones and different sounds in their voices. Again, you've got long arms. You can reach right down and get some too. We have that exclamation mark also. You have, now this is very interesting. You have is two words. It's called a contraction. I'm wondering what two words they are. We know the first one is you, and the second word is have. So it is shorten you have down to the word you've. Very interesting. I wonder if we can find any more contractions throughout our reading today. Let's continue reading.
Get some too. So that big kangaroo put his long arm deep into the hole and pulled out a handful of spiders. Ugh! Try again, said the short-armed kangaroo. Put your arm right down into the hole. That's where the sugar bag is. So the big kangaroo put his hand into the hole again, but only pulled out more spiders. The short-armed kangaroo kept reaching just inside the hole and pulling out more and more sugar bag. Pretty soon, he'd eaten it all himself.
Oh, he's eaten it all himself. What a little greedy kangaroo. Okay, on this page, we can see these three dotted lines. It's more than one full stop. There's three dots. I wonder what that might mean. The short-armed kangaroo kept reaching just inside the hole. Dot, 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 dot. I think that's leaving us in suspense. We want to know what's going to happen when he puts his arm into the hole. So those dots are kind of leading us for more. We're wanting to find out what happens next. It's not the end of the idea because we want to find out what happens next. So, and pulling out more and more sugar bag. Pretty soon, he'd eaten it all himself. Oh, I found another contraction. Well, I wonder what this means. The first word is he. He'd eaten it all himself. Oh, let's see what makes sense. Pretty sure he would eaten it all himself. Oh, that doesn't make sense. Pretty sure he had eaten it all himself. Yeah, that makes sense. So he'd means he had. There we go. Miss Portelli needs to practice her writing on this board, doesn't she? Excellent job, Year 1. Let's continue reading.
Himself. The big kangaroo was wild. That short-armed kangaroo had tricked him. He went over to a white gum tree and broke off a big stick. The short-armed kangaroo thought he'd better get a stick too. He went and broke one off a red bloodwood tree. And then they started to fight. They hit each other over the head with those sticks until the big kangaroo ran away.
So we know what happens at the end of this story, but this is an event leading up to how the kangaroo got their tail. They broke the branches off the tree. They're fighting with the sticks. Now I wonder what will happen next. I know you know. Let's find out to see if you're correct.
Well, that short-armed kangaroo threw his stick and it stuck right into the big kangaroo. That made the big kangaroo even more wild. So he turned round and threw his stick. It stuck right into the short-armed kangaroo.
So I think this event in the story actually answers our question. Our question is how did the kangaroos get their tail? And we can see that they didn't have a tail. They started by having no tail. But then when they were fighting and they threw the sticks at each other, what happened? It stuck into them. Right into them, we can see, and that's how they got their tail. Very, very interesting.
Then they each hopped away back to their own country. The big kangaroo went back to the low country where the sugar grass grows, and the short-armed kangaroo hopped away up into the hills. I am a sugar grass countryman now, said the big red plains kangaroo. I will live here forever. And I am a boulder countryman, that short-armed kangaroo said. I will live in the hills amongst the boulders and spinifex.
So the word boulders actually refers to these big rocks in the landscape. And we can see that the word spinifex. Now, this word refers to the grass in the landscape. So there's all different types of grass, and it's called spinifex. So interesting, we're learning some more words about the landscape because it's all about the outback Australian landscape. Because we know that's where kangaroos often tend to live out in the wild. Okay, that is the end of our story. Your learning task for today in your learning journal is to write a sentence, or you might write more than a sentence. You might write a couple of sentences explaining how the kangaroos got their tails. So we talked about the events leading up to how they got their tails. So that might give you a little bit of a clue. You might want to look back at the pictures. They might give you more of a clue on how they got their tails. So you need to start your sentence by saying, the kangaroos got their tails because, and you need to tell me how and why. Okay. I know you can do a great job of that, year one. We can't wait to read your responses. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and I'll see you tomorrow for one more shared reading lesson on this book. See you later.